Hello everybody and welcome to Hillbilly Herpetology. Today we're back with the third installment on Savanna monitors, our installment on juveniles. Now, instead of showing you pictures of the Savanna monitors eating or anything like that today, I thought what I'd do is I'd go ahead and I'd set up an enclosure, a sample enclosure, while I was talking about them. It's going to be only a 10-gallon tank size enclosure, but the whole point of this is just to show you how it should be set up. The only thing that should really change between baby, juvenile, adult is the size of the enclosures. And we'll talk about enclosure sizes in another video. I'm going to do a whole video on my thought on enclosure sizes. That's definitely going to be one that I want to have Gary in the video with me talking to you guys, because he's got a lot of experience on that too. And we've kind of seen some pretty interesting things and have our own thoughts on that. And we both share different thoughts on that, which is what's really interesting about doing this. Two different people doing this is we do things slightly differently, and that's because we want to see scientifically what is the better way for these guys, and how are you going to know that if you're not doing it multiple different ways. So, without further ado, we're going to get into the actual care and husbandry of juvenile Savanna monitors, and I'm going to be doing an enclosure while we're talking about it. All right, we're talking about juvenile Savanna monitors today while I actually work in this enclosure. I'm going to be putting it together, and I'll explain about the enclosure and putting it together at the end. For now, we're just going to talk about the monitors while I'm putting it together. So, the first thing is, you have a juvenile Savanna monitor if you've gotten to this stage. Congratulations. And the reason I say that is because anytime that your animal goes from a juvenile or from a hatchling to a juvenile, no matter what the animal is, you have kind of just gotten to the point where it's going to be a lot hardier. You don't have to worry about this thing dying on you quite as easy as what you did before. Because these things can definitely be easy to kill if you don't know what you're doing when they're young. When they get to be juvenile, they turn into what I like to call bulletproof. As long as you kind of know what you're doing and you don't overfeed them, like, they're really hardy. They're hard to kill. Out in the wild, these are animals that'll go up to 6 months of the year without eating. And so because of that, they can withstand a lot more than what people think. But we always try to keep them as amazing as we can. Now, you're going to be keeping your temperatures a little bit higher, whereas before I said 112 is about the highest that I found a reason to go for with the youngsters. I will also say that with the juveniles, 120 seems to be a really good spot to be at. That's what I've noticed that they like. They don't tend to go under it any higher, but I have heard of some people that will. And so you really just got to play with it. If you go up to 130 and you notice that your animal is not using the basking spot and it's staying on the outer edges, then it's too warm. It doesn't want it that warm. So drop it down a little bit. If you drop it down to 105 and you notice your animal's constantly in the light, never going anywhere else, well, maybe you should think about raising that temperature up a little bit then, so it can be heated up nice and quick, and then we back off about its business doing what it wants to do. You're going to be feeding these things a whole lot less now that they're at this stage. You have to remember that these things, as babies, eat and grow and grow and grow. Once they hit the juvenile stage, they're going to slow down a whole lot on growing, and so they're going to grow out if you don't watch what you're doing. So you're going to slow way down. You're going to look for visual cues for if they're getting too fat or not. Monitor lizards should have a line going down the side of their stomachs that you kind of can see, and if you can't see that, it's a good indication that you're starting to make them a little bit overweight, and that maybe you should back up on that a little bit. Another thing is you can start feeding whole prey now. You can feed them rodents. Now, one thing I will say that I'm doing separately from Gary is I am feeding rodents and Gary is not. This is a big source of contention among keepers. A lot of people say that they are strictly insectivores, but I've also talked with people who have successfully bred these things, and they feed nothing but rodents and eggs. So I really have to say this is an experiment for both of us to see. One thing I'll say so far is that for sure, it seems like Gary's monitors are just the picture of health and quality. And, you know, I've struggled with keeping Godzilla's weight down, and it didn't seem like Gary's had those same issues out of feeding nothing but insects. And I mean, he does have to watch how often he feeds, but I bet you he feeds his more than I get to feed mine. So, you know, that's just another thing to think about there whenever you're picking what you feed them. If you want to feed them often, feed them bugs. If you don't mind only feeding them once every week or two whenever they're juveniles, feed them rodents. Also, they don't lose weight. These are animals that are set up, like I said earlier, to go 5-6 months out of the year without eating. And they've actually done a study out in the wild where they took the fat bodies out of these animals and basically sutured the animal back up, and the animal still survived even after that. And so because of that, it's insane the metabolisms that these animals can have. So I definitely would not overfeed them. They do not lose weight. And then obviously as they get bigger, you're going to want to go with a bigger enclosure. Other than that, they're kept very much like the baby stage ones. They're just a little bit warmer because they're bigger. You're still going to keep your humidity up there 60-70%. You know, everything else is going to be the same on these guys except the things that I mentioned. And the diet, like I said, the diet can change, and that's going to be a personal choice depending on the breeder. So now that we've got this all set up, we're going to go around and we're going to talk about the different things that I did here and why I did them. So down here, where there's moss coming out of, you can put liquid there, and that's going to make a microclimate for this animal to where it can get down here. It's going to be on the warm side. It can get down here. It's still going to be warm. It's going to be higher humidity, and that's so that way if it wants to be warm but not basking, it can still go down here. And I have this set up because, like I said, you can get away with doing a smaller enclosure with these babies if you know how to set it up and make the microclimates. So I have this here. This is ceramic. This is what the light is going to be over top of here. And it's going to hit this ceramic, and it's going to warm this ceramic up really nicely, and this ceramic is going to hold heat. So you don't want to have the hide directly under this thing because it's going to hold way too much heat. That's why I put that piece of cork bark down and dirt up on top of the cork bark, and then the hide down underneath that. That's creating that microclimate to where there's enough layers there between this and the light that it's still going to be warm down there, but it's not going to be like it's basking still. Over here, you'll see underneath this, I've put a little hide, so that way on the cool side, they have a spot to go, get away from everything at. The hides are very important. This is where they're going to feel secure, and not to worry, they'll make their own too. I can sit here and put this enclosure together, and these guys are going to make it their own. So we've got a couple of decorations here. This is just to add a little spice to the enclosure for you to look at, and for them to feel a little bit more secure when they're moving around. They can hide and things like that, and it enriches their environment too. This water bowl, this food bowl. And then they've got a little bit of space to move around here, but they've got a lot of stuff going on to where they always can feel secure. They always have something to duck underneath of. Now, another thing I'm going to mention about the humidity. First of all, it's summertime. Remember, in the summertime, humidity is naturally high. The humidity in my house right now is probably 50-some, 60-some%. But if you look down here, you can see where the moisture level is in our dirt. Now, I haven't added moisture to this dirt for a long time. This is what my big Mel Laziodora Parahybana tarantula was in, that molted out Mel a little while ago. And so I haven't added water to this in a long time. I just figured I would use this enclosure for the video today. So when you're adding water to this, you know, when you start seeing the liquid levels get down, this is when you're going to want to add some water to it. But it's okay for the top layer to dry out, and it's good for the top layer to dry out. You don't want your animal sitting on wet all the time. And you also have to remember that your animal is perfectly capable of burrowing down here to where it wants to be at if it wants that extra moisture. But being as I haven't put any liquid in here for a long time, we're going to go ahead and do that. And I'm going to show you guys a good way of doing that to where you're not flooding out the enclosure, but you're still getting the moisture down here to these levels. So you take this pen and you dig yourself a furrow on the side, right? Then I'm just gonna take my spray nozzle here. Should already had it pumped. And I'm just gonna spray it right there. Now, by doing this, I'm able to maintain the top levels staying moist, or staying dry, while making sure that the bottom of the enclosure is getting that extra liquid that it needs. So that way, if your animal needs it, it can burrow down there and get the extra moisture. It can make its own microclimate. And if you look over here to the side, you'll see how that just goes down in there and then spreads out through the bottom. And you can make one of these here, make one of them here, and then do them on the other sides, and then you've gotten a nice area of wet, but without the top being super wet. If the top stays super wet, they can get scale rot, and that is not a good thing. So I hope y'all have learned something from this video. Oh, the one last thing I wanted to talk about when it comes to the enclosure and the temperature of the basking spot. This is the other important thing. If you're gonna make do with something that's not perfect for these guys, you really have to think outside of the box. So you sit here, you put that light there, right? And you're testing your basking spot with your laser gun. And you're like, oh my goodness, the basking spot is 130 and it doesn't need to be that warm. What do I do? Well, there's three things you can do. One, get a different bulb. Two, raise this up away from the basking area, increasing the distance between your bulb and the basking spot, which will in turn lower your basking temperature. Three, lower your basking platform. So that would require that you take some of this dirt out of here, move everything that's here down a couple of inches, and then see what your basking spot is at then. And then there's the fourth option that I forgot to mention that I mentioned in the last video, and that is changing the ambient temperature of your room. So if your room is 80 degrees and this basking spot is 10 degrees too high, if you get your room down to 70-ish degrees, it will lower the basking spot temperature too. So that could help as well. I don't think it would lower it the whole 10 degrees you'd want it lower, but it would help. So those are just all the thoughts there with building up the enclosure. If y'all have any questions, just let me know. I'll be more than happy to help you with that. And y'all have a great day, and thank you for watching this episode of Hillbilly Herpetology.